There we go. Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Avinash. He's a lead UX designer at National History Museum, and I had the great pleasure of listening to him amongst many other people at UX Brighton towards the end of last year. So he is going to bring the same presentation I got to hear back then, and it was very thought-provoking for me. So I'm hoping that it sheds light on design and economics for you guys as well, and gets you thinking in a larger picture. And with that, I'm going to hand over.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Tim, and hi, everyone. All right, let me share my screen. Full screen mode. 1 second. Lovely stuff. You can see that all good?
Yep, all good from our end.
Fantastic. Good stuff. Alrighty. Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. So yeah, as Tim mentioned, I did this talk at UX Brighton back in October. So yeah, no big stage with shining lights this time. A bit less nerve-wracking for sure. But yeah, felt like standing up. So yeah, got my standing desk going. Slash, it's actually on some shelves right now. So not as fancy as a standing desk. But yeah, our topic today is all about economics, as Tim mentioned, and it's really what we can teach UXers about shaping impactful experiences in the real world. Yeah, a bit about me. My name's Avinash. I'm the lead UX designer at the Natural History Museum in London, so the one with all the dinosaurs. Yeah, many UXs I meet though, I've got a bit of a weird, different, diverse background. So I studied actuarial science at university, and that's essentially the mathematics of risk, how we quantify that risk and how we price it into financial products like insurance, pensions, and like investments and stuff like that. Yeah, really fun. I know. There's a reason why I don't do it anymore. I mean, what that did give me though is a bit of a different perspective that I now bring to my work as a UX designer, and I just wanted to share all of that with some of you, with all of you wonderful people. So the talk, it should refresh some of your ideas of what economics is. We'll go back to some of the basics and then weave it in with some core tenets of UX as well, and should give you some actionable takeaways that you can take when you get back to work. So yeah, that's me tucking into a banh mi Vietnamese sandwich in Brighton. It worked more for context when we were in Brighton. So let's start off with the basics. What is economics? So it's a pretty broad area of study, and I'm going to use the analogy of pasta alla carbonara here. So you've got the three main ingredients of carbonara. You've got guanciale or some kind of pork with lots of fat on it. You've got pecorino cheese and eggs. Three main ingredients. But let's say you've got microeconomics, pardon me. So microeconomics focuses on how individual users and businesses make choices. So like how customers decide which products they want to buy based on value or the cost of them, and also how companies set prices. Then you've got macroeconomics, which focuses on the large-scale economic factors like overall market growth, GDP, unemployment, inflation, or really just any governmental policies that you would hear about in the news as being referred to as the economy. And then you've got behavioral economics as well. So that's really the role that psychology plays in decision making, and just the fact that we're really not very rational human beings at all, and certainly not rational decision makers. So you probably would have heard a lot more about the behavioral economics as UX designers. There's a lot of psychology involved in it, and the key book being Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Really good stuff in there. But a small secret tip, I also love adding garlic and Chinese chili oil to my carbonara. So my Italian friends, they call it sacrilege. I think it's innovation. That gives me an excuse to have a couple of smaller, but no less important key elements to the economic recipe. And you've got capital markets. So that's looking at the investment markets, trading, and derivatives. Basically, yeah, what you might think of when you think of sort of economics and the city. And then international trade, which has had a lot of focus in recent months with Donald Trump's trade tariffs, a lot more so in the last few days, I suppose, as well with all the Greenland tariffs. So whilst we'd love to give a full lecture series on all of this, we've only got I think only another half an hour left. So we'll focus on a few main themes from microeconomics and behavioral economics, and some clear actionable insights you can use when you get back to work. So, as a definition, what is economics? I really love this one by Andrew Lee, who wrote The Shortest History of Economics. Great book. And so, economics isn't the study of money, it's the study of well being. Money is just the measuring stick we use to see how well policies and decisions maximize happiness. So, unpacking that a bit is my definition. I believe economics is all about making meaningful change in society by identifying and researching key aspects of pressing problems, working out which levers you can pull to help solve those problems, then assessing the risk or value of taking action or not taking action. So, what is the upside that we could gain? Or also, what's the risk of the downside as well? And then forecasting what the future might look like, or prototyping the future, and thinking what that might look like if our change is successful or even unsuccessful, and then putting in place the systems to make it a reality, and out there in the world. So it sounds a lot like UX and service design. I guess that I have molded the definition a little bit there to make it sound so, but that's really just because economics and UX really are two sides of the same coin. They're both about solving problems by taking the time to understand the full system and understanding and designing for real contexts. So why aren't UXs and economists best pals typically? Maybe it's about the money and how most people associate economics with acquiring massive wealth and inequality, but that's just when economics is manipulated. What about dark patterns in UX that we have to use sometimes to nudge users to make decisions that may be more in our business's interests than their own? We see ourselves like the knight in shining armor, the Luke Skywalker, for our users, but the reality is, like, often dark patterns can creep in, and it's our job to really make sure we can balance those with the demands from stakeholders. So both of our disciplines, economics and UX, hold great power to manipulate, just like all systems, susceptible to corruption, but they can also be used to affect meaningful change when they're used for good. So, takeaway for the day number one: UX and economics are both toolboxes to solve problems in the real world. They're really just two sides of the same coin. Alrighty, let's get into the basics of supply and demand. So, supply is the amount of products producers are willing to sell in a market. So how many croissants are available at my local hipster bakery? And demand is the amount of product consumers or customers are willing to buy for a given price. So how many of those delicious, but let's be honest, overpriced pockets of baked joy will be gone by the end of the day? That's demand. So it's pretty straightforward. It's all about amounts, how much people are willing to buy and also looking to sell. So in classical economic theory, supply and demand have an inverse relationship. So when the price goes up, demand goes down typically, and supply typically goes up. And to give that as a little example, during the harvest season, the supply of strawberries rises because there's abundance of strawberries. They're all fruiting all at the same time. So we need to, where we're harvesting them, and they're in the shops. With that, the supply has increased, so prices typically fall, and that leads to an increase in demand because shoppers are more willing to buy at that lower price. But outside the harvest season, supply is lower unless you're the kind of farmer who can afford to grow strawberries in greenhouses. It's pretty hard to grow strawberries during winter, and even then, even if you can, then the farmers are going to pass those prices, all those costs of production onto consumers as well. So that's why prices would rise in outside the harvest season, and the demand drops as consumers may be looking to alternative fruits or just buying less strawberries in the first place. So you can start to see how the amount of available product that impacts prices, which impacts demand, and vice versa. So how does this apply to UX? Well, it's all about the perception of supply and demand, perception being the key word. So customers don't see real-time supply and demand in our products. Even in trading apps, you might think that it's sort of quite transparent. You can see the price changing based on supply and demand, but that's even lagging a little bit as well. So mostly it's the supply and demand, it's implied by signals in the way that the business or product experience communicates to customers and users. It's mostly through channels like marketing, through microcopy in the product, or even the design patterns themselves. So we've got a big role to play as UX designers to make sure that that's done so transparently and effectively. But the messaging really just depends on how it's framed, and really sometimes it can actually drive a level of scarcity. So in terms of my personal music taste, I love punk, heavy metal, but my partner is a huge Swiftie. I won't lie though, like her latest album, it was like, yeah, it had some catchy tunes on it. I'll tolerate them sometimes if my partner puts them on. But for the uninitiated, Taylor Swift, she recently released her 12th studio album, and it generated quite a bit of excitement online when she released 34 vinyl variants, each with different colors and bonus tracks. And what our team did was they staggered the announcements of each variant release, but at each point made it clear that there was a very limited level of stock on each supply of each variant, and that drove a rush of purchases for people to essentially just to buy whilst they were still on sale. And then once they were all out of stock, great, the next variant would be announced, and that whole cycle of scarcity would start all over again. So thankfully, my fantastic partner, she only bought one variant, but many diehard Swifties bought quite a few of them actually. So it's a smart strategy because it exemplifies the scarcity effect that stems from managing supply in order to stoke demand. But let's of course ask ourselves those ethical questions before we go and apply this as a textbook example to follow. So when you get back to the office, sit down with your product and run a quick audit. Just run through it like a user or like a heuristic review, and look out for how you communicate supply and demand to your users. You can think about how you identify where points in the journey where users might be feeling scarcity. Think about whether they're intentional to help users move along the journey, or if they're potentially harmful and a dark pattern starting to creep in. You could be thinking about the level of scarcity with product availability, classic supply, or it could be about time left in the checkout, or even exclusive access to a certain course that you've got going. So then you can ask yourself how you might communicate that supply and demand differently based on the problems you've identified in the journey. So how might we communicate supply and demand more transparently to help users make better decisions? Or even on the other side of things, if we're starting to see in the user journey that we're seeing choke points where users are either dropping off in our data very rapidly at one point, or they're just stopping and not knowing where else to go effectively, then we might want to think about how we might use supply and demand and communicating that to nudge them along a little. So supply and demand, they have an inverse relationship and affect the perceived value of your product. So on to price elasticity. Price elasticity, it's a measure to explain how sensitive our customers are to changes in price. So it varies from one product to another. It also varies from one customer segment to another, and it even varies from the same customer at different times, depending on when you ask them. So let's imagine you're increasing or decreasing the price of your product. Price elasticity, it answers the question how much you might be expecting demand to shift when you make that change. So it's calculated as the percentage change in demand divided by the change in price. And if that measure ends up being less than 1, then you can say there's little or no demand shift, and your product is probably quite price inelastic. But if the measure is more than 1, you'd say that it's quite elastic, and you should expect a large demand shift when you change prices, whether that be up or down. So how does this apply to UX at all? It's really key for products who use dynamic pricing. You'll see this used with a lot of airlines or Uber, and it gives them an idea of the room they're safe to play with as they increase or decrease prices at any given time. You've also got habit-forming products. They tend to have a lower price elasticity because of the way that customers have embedded them into their lives and aren't willing to forego them. Even if one were to increase the prices massively on, for example, tobacco or medication, people are quite reliant upon them because they're embedded into their lives. So even an increase in price isn't going to impact demand quite as much for a lot of people. So yeah, maybe not something to aspire to with those products, but a dynamic to certainly be aware of. But if your product is embedded into customers' lives in a healthy way, and you built a strong brand identity that your customers love, they're likely to be more inelastic to your price changes and stay with you. Or if you introduce a new product at a higher price level. Also, many companies charge different prices to different customer segments. Like at the Natural History Museum where I work, we charge less on child tickets, less on student tickets, and other concession groups for our exhibitions, because we know their disposable income tends to be less. So they're more price elastic than many working adults who have a higher price on their tickets. So, example, like I mentioned, Uber uses this pretty strongly. So, during periods of high demand, they increase their fares in real time. And that's needed because Uber's a competitive marketplace. What I mean by competitive marketplace is you've got many different drivers. They're all competing with one another for the business of a small pool of customers looking for rides. But because of how supply and demand balances out at peak times, sometimes there are far more customers than there are drivers in a particular area. So that is the basics of free market economics, where buyers and sellers, they're competing with one another to determine and agree a fair price. So during those surge times, Uber needs to attract more drivers with higher fares to compensate them to some of those areas that have more customers than drivers. But Uber really needs to understand the level of price surge that passengers that are willing to pay or accept, because Uber doesn't own a monopoly on taxis or taxi hailing apps. You've of course got Bolt as another competitor, or Lyft, or even your classic black cabs in London. That they're also competitors. So that's why Uber needs to make sure that it increases prices within a certain bracket. That's how understanding price elasticity is really helpful to them. So, what can you do with all of this when you get back? So, it's absolutely great if you can, but you don't need to actually calculate your price elasticity. I don't know the price elasticity of specifically, or have measured them for all of our visitors to the museum. But really, it's just quite useful to be aware of your customer base's approximate sensitivity to price changes, and just start a conversation about it. Really, just critically look at your pricing model compared to other similar products out there, and ask critically, why do you charge the prices you do? You could run experiments and to workshop what you think could happen if you increased or decreased your prices. Like, are there specific times of the year, week, or day when you predict customers might be more or less price elastic or sensitive to changes in price? Also, are there any certain highly elastic customer segments that you could help with a reduction in price? But also consider, if you reduced prices for one segment, would certain other inelastic segments be willing to pick up the slack, or would this leave a massive hole in your overall revenue? So, something to consider there as well. So, takeaway number 3: consider how different customers vary in their sensitivity to price changes. Alrighty, on to externalities. So externalities, they're essentially just a fancy term for side effects. They are unintended consequences that impact people or systems in ways that you didn't expect. But because we didn't expect them, they often fall into that murky bucket of unknown unknowns, or things that we didn't know we didn't know. So it's essential to learn from them when they appear in our day-to-day practice, but also to learn from and use this prior experience to anticipate them in future. So in economics, you've got two main types of externalities. You've got positive externalities and negative externalities. So as the name suggests, positive externalities, they're beneficial side effects. Like if we make accessibility improvements, it doesn't just improve the experience for disabled users, but also makes it more clear and usable for non-disabled users too. And with negative externalities, they're obviously your more harmful ones. So, like for example, if we use a complex ID verification system to sign up for our digital products, that can exclude some older people or people with visual impairments from using our service as well. So, looking at food delivery apps and their use of negative externalities or impact with them as well, like Deliveroo or Uber Eats or Just Eat, they've of course made it so much more convenient to order our favorite pad thai or Neapolitan pizza. I still remember the days back in the early 2000s when we'd have a full drawer of takeaway menus. And it was a simpler time, wasn't it, back then? But food delivery apps, they've really helped keep many restaurants open during the pandemic as well. They supercharged logistics, allowing restaurants that don't have their own delivery drivers to do more business in takeout than at tables in the restaurant itself. But like every design, there are also negative externalities that don't share the same spotlight as all of that good news. So there's the environmental side, packaging, waste, and increasing traffic with delivery drivers. Of course, that impacts the carbon footprint. And these sometimes, or often actually, externalities aren't actually suffered directly by the users of the platforms, but by society as a whole and people who aren't directly involved in the transaction. The ease of use of these apps, it can also drive unsustainable ordering behaviors from users, with users spending more than they can afford on takeaway food, and obviously the health implications of not getting enough home cooked fresh meals, another externality there. Also, the high commission fees, they can often harm smaller local restaurants who are forced to use the platforms because it's often the only way that they can find new customers and customers can discover them. But this works in the favor of big chains who can just absorb the costs of these of the high commission fees of these apps, whereas it not with smaller restaurants, not so much. They don't really have a choice. So there'll always be externalities or side effects, things we didn't expect. That's okay. It's all right. That's just something to accept. But what we can do is use them as signals to directly inform the next iteration of our designs. They can also help us explain the value of our work and our impact that we're having as UX designers beyond just KPIs and metrics. And they also help us understand the problem space far more broadly. So that leads me on to system mapping. So systems mapping, some of you might have come across this. It's a fantastic way to really unpack a problem and understand the role that your organization or your team can have to affect real change. So it's probably most useful in the discovery phase or in product strategy planning as a workshop with your team or stakeholders. So what you want to do is start with a big research question in the middle of your board, some phenomenon of user behavior that you're trying to unpack. So why is I don't know. For example, an example from my role at the museum might be why are tickets to our latest exhibition not selling as well as the previous one? That's of course not the case. Our space exhibition is doing very well this time, much better than the last one actually. But let's say that is the case. Then have your team start to add post-it notes to the board about some potential causes of the problem. Like it could be the subject matter of this current exhibition. It's just not hitting the same levels of interest as with our key audiences as the last one, or it could be the cost of living crisis that's having an impact on when what people are spending their money on. Maybe they see exhibitions as something for the times when they have lots of money. So next, you can start to add signals alongside some of those causes to support them. So what's some evidence out there to support some of these causes? And now, naturally, some of those signals, they're going to be positive and negative externalities. Like, for example, one of them could be limited accessibility options for visitors with disabilities. That could be discouraging purchases for our tickets as well. And now you want to start thinking about if there's any opportunities in any of these causes or signals. So do any of these have the potential for ripple effects? Great, you could get your team to add a little sticker for those ripple effects, i.e. like if we made some change in this area, could it have a knock-on effect, positive or negative, on any other areas as well, like a domino effect? Also, you can start to think about, are we already seeing positive change in any of these areas already? That have nothing to do with what we're doing. It's already on an upward trajectory trend. Things are changing. Could we just ride on the coattails of that? Or also, are any of these areas frozen and they're frozen in state? Either they really need shaking up because no one's done it in a while, or it's really just too much effort even for us and we should avoid it at all costs. So this should start to tell you where some basic opportunities lie. I also tried system mapping with my team to map our sphere of influence an offsite a few months ago. The theme of the day, it was all about sort of UX impact, thinking about where we already have impact and how we could measure that and share it better across the organization. So system mapping was really helpful, just to understand who we impact directly and indirectly. So we start off by mapping all of the activities we do as UX designers and researchers to help drive some of the organization's and product team's objectives. So for us, it fell into 5 major buckets. Your basics: researching and identifying customer needs and contexts, using data to drive empathy in workshops, looking ahead and beyond our organization for inspiration, horizon scanning, that kind of thing, and designing new products and iterating. That, of course, takes the big bulk of our time. And then ensuring technical feasibility and QA, especially for accessibility as well. So then taking a step out from that, drew another big circle around those areas and thinking about the direct impact we have both on end users and also internal teams at the museum as well. So who do we impact and how, both positively and negatively? So on the end user side of things, there's stuff that we always talk about in the product teams, from museum visitors to researchers and educators, academics. But on the internal team side, this is really what maybe we don't talk about quite as much as thinking about them as our users. And it raised some really interesting points about how we should be more intentional and aware of our potential impact with the marketing team, the data team, retail and content as well. So taking another step out from there, considering the indirect impact, and this is really where I think the most interesting insights came from for the day, and it's really where maybe these could be the groups of people who don't directly fall into our key jobs to be done, but there are opportunities that we found there as well, and that's sort of where externalities start to come in here too. So some interesting examples that came up for us on the end user side that we didn't think about as much would be young children and their parents. They have direct impact with engaging with our at-home content and museum planning information, but a lot of it's actually for the kids. So the kids themselves, they're our indirect audience there. We also considered social media followers too, a group that we don't directly touch in the UX team. That's mostly for the marketing team and content teams. But really, if we're really designing for end-to-end real journeys, that means that we do impact them because that's sort of where a lot of our journeys start. And we've got to make sure we're consistent throughout the journey. So next, we really dot voted certain areas, thinking about where we wanted to focus more on. And also to connect with more teams, connect with more stakeholders, and also more end users to think where there's opportunities to improve our impact as well. So takeaway number 4, there are always side effects. Make sure you listen to them, and who knows, they could help as well. So finally, let's delve into behavioral economics and prospect theory. So as I mentioned, behavioral economics, it was mostly proposed by the Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman in his groundbreaking book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And prospect theory teaches us that people don't evaluate gains and losses in absolute terms, but instead we do so relative to our current situation and where we started from. So basically, we're not objective computers running statistical probability models in our heads, and whenever we make a decision, the way we make decisions typically it depends on how we're feeling at the time and our contexts. So as UXers, I'm sure like we're all used to telling stakeholders all the time to design for real people and how they actually use our products, not just in theory how we'd like them to. Prospect theory just gives us a great framework to think about how real people make decisions when it doesn't follow logical rationality. So what does that actually look like? Well, it starts by framing the probabilities against what you're looking to gain or lose. So if we're presented with a situation where there's quite a high probability of loss, so for example, up there in the top left-hand corner, let's say we own a cider company, and actually, I don't know if anyone watches Clarkson's Farm, but obviously Jeremy Clarkson started a cider brand. Of course he did. And this exact example happened to him on the show. People started buying his cider, and then they just started exploding when he took them home. And that was just because there was a germ growing in the bottom of them, essentially, that would make these bottles explode at people's homes. So, but instead of throwing the cider away, which is what was advised, or disposing of it safely, most people will minimize the risk, and they'll think that the risk doesn't apply to them. They'll just try opening the bottle anyway, hoping that it doesn't explode in their face. That is, of course, also how gambling works. And the further down the hole of losses you go with gambling, very often, the more risky plays you'll often make. So that's why we call it a risk-seeking behavior. That often happens in this top left quadrant, where you're highly likely to make losses. In prospect theory, so we go down to where you're pretty unlikely to win anything as well. An example of this could be a national lottery, so where your chances of winning a huge amount of money are very small, but a lot of people spend hundreds of pounds a year on it, just for this quite small chance. And then on the other side of things as well, taking the rugby example, when I did this talk at UX Brighton, there was going to be an England rugby game the next day against Fiji. Yes, thank God we won. But let's say in this example, we were 40-10 up at half time. So in the second half, we feel like we're pretty likely to win, and we're unlikely to make any risky plays because we want to protect the lead that we have and win the game. So that's when we'll tend to be more risk averse. Really, that doesn't follow logical rationality. You'd think that if we're ahead on the scorecards, great, we can take more risks. But human beings want to protect what we have. And on the other side of things, if we're for example, for some reason we are one player down, like one of our players has fouled someone and they get sent off, they got a red card, there's a lower chance that Fiji will win the game. Fiji had one of their players sent off, then there's a low chance we'll win the game. They'll win the game. So it's not likely that we'll take risks as well, but they'll be pretty risk averse as well. So how does this apply to UX? Really, it's sort of thinking about what the classical UX approach might be, and then thinking about how we might bring risk or irrational behavior, thinking about risk into things as well. So instead of just designing for logical decision flows and straightforward best case user journeys, I try to anticipate whether users will make decisions based on where they are at emotionally, and use their current situation as a reference point to make decisions from as well. So they won't always be rational. So design with this context in mind, allow for irrationality. Remember, we're not probabilistic machines. Often we're not very rational. Also, instead of just presenting risks neutrally and clearly, that's of course important to inform user decisions, think about how we could also use microcopies to frame risks as we'd like them to be perceived. Do we want people to be aware of a small risk? Like there's an example might be, there's a 5% chance of contamination with this particular product. We probably want people to be aware of that, right? Or if you're trying to get people to make a decision that's for their own good, but the probability of loss is quite small, do we focus on the 95% of people who might be using our app to make healthier food choices? Do you focus on the 95% or the 5%? It's about sort of the message you're trying to send. Of course, whilst it's sort of crucial to help users to the next step in the journey as well, you really want to think about how you could support smart decisions even when they're seeing or feeling that they're losing something right there in that moment as well. So if users are losing money on Tesla stock in a trading app that you run, consider that they're likely to make more risky decisions, like selling their stock right now if the stock price is going down. But because you've run this trading app for a long time, you know that this is just a very temporary dip, maybe because Elon Musk has said something stupid again, and they're probably going to make more money if the user holds on to their investment. Actually, it's just going to kick back up to where it was tomorrow. So how could you help them to make smart decisions even when they're losing or feeling like they're losing on paper right there and then as well? So that will reach their long-term goal. So takeaway number 5, design for perceived risk. And thank you all very much.
Avinash,
I
thank
don't
you.
know.
As you can see, you can find Avinash on LinkedIn, and I would highly recommend going to check out and follow him. He provides some very interesting insights from his work and various books he has read and studied. So, Avinash, thank you so much for this. Yeah, absolutely. Round of applause. Thank you. Um, we've had a couple of people drop off because they've signed in from Brazil, and it's a meetings middle of the day over there. But does anybody have any questions that they would like to clarify with Avinash? Okay, I have one, Avinash.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Thinking you near the beginning you were talking about pricing structures and how supply and demand affect each other. How much of this do you actually use in your UX day to day nowadays versus the study that you did before?
Yeah, sure. So I think I use it because I manage a team of 7 UX UI designers at the museum. We do research, like I mentioned, sort of the whole end-to-end piece. And so a lot of the time I find my team, they get very deep into the weeds. Like it's sort of ops day to day. They sell because everything is it's very busy. They struggle to often find the time to sort of bring their heads up above the trenches, as I like to think about it, and think strategically. So I find that I can often bring a bit of a different perspective in some of our one-to-ones when they're just thinking user, user, user. I can help them think, okay, here's actually sort of where some of the incentives might lie as well. Because sometimes I think also as UX designers, we do think a little, maybe a little in a complacent way about the business. You often hear UX designers complain, oh, the business wants us to do this. But I think really understanding sort of why the business might be asking us to do this, because most of us work in software products, so it's a bit harder to see the supply demand relationship there. But we all, like sort of with the Taylor Swift example, you can always generate scarcity, and often there'll be scarcity on your balance sheet right now. So maybe that's why stakeholders are pretty they're pushing us to drive commercial metrics and push more revenue generating pieces in our journey for our users. That sort of, so it's understanding things on the stakeholder side of things, thinking about it in that way, but also on the user side of things. Why are people making certain choices? It's and also then down to communication as well. Like we have a content team that they're absolutely fantastic, but they're sort of more responsible for our long form content. The UX team, we're mostly responsible for a lot of the micro copy. And microcopy, you have to really think about how you're communicating transparently, but also like realistically to get people to go further down the journey that is good for them, also good for your business as well. So I think it's a good strategic tool, just to think about it as a psychological principle and maybe be a bit more empathetic for where people are coming from.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, I often find myself in conversations with marketing team, feeling a little bit out of my depth. So this talk's been very helpful to kind of bring me up to speed on that.
Thanks. Yeah, hopefully with the finance team next as well.
Hopefully, yeah. We'll see where that goes. Before we round up, does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask?
Oh, QR code's not working. I'm sure we can just send a link around to the LinkedIn. I'll just type in my name, Avinash Mair, into LinkedIn.
Yeah,
I'll be
fantastic.
the only one.
Thanks, Avinash. I don't use LinkedIn that much these days. It looks like I can't message you unless I subscriber.
Oh, I think just go to the 3 dots. It will allow you to connect there actually as well. So then you can message there if you 3 dots connect. That normally works.
Thank you. Excellent talk. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much.
So just to round up, thank you once again for everyone who has come along today. We're going to have another online talk in 2 months, so March time, where we have Whitby, sorry. He's an AI ethicist, So he's been in the field for about 40 years, if anybody can believe that AI has been around for 40 years. And he has agreed to come along and shed some light on the ethics of AI and professionalism within our industry. So keep an eye on LinkedIn, and I'll be pushing out signups for that around the beginning of March, maybe the end of February. And for those in the local area near around Basingstoke and Southampton, we're going to be having a meetup next month, roughly in the middle of the month on a Wednesday. Again, keep an eye out and you'll get the information. Well, thank you, everybody, and look forward to seeing you again sometime soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Avinash, thank you so much. Real pleasure to hear you again. I took away so much more a second time around from getting to hear that. So,
thank you, mate. Cool.
Yes.
Have a good evening.
Top-notch meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.